Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Seddon and Laceys Comic Stash. That's Seddon. I remembered which way round it is now.
Yes.
And this week we have top 5s of non-mainstream films. Rules for top 5s. That's what we like.
We love a rule.
You can't just go, oh, my top 5, Batman, Ragnarok, Guardians.
I guess before we get to the specific rules, I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, it was your idea, wasn't it? And I really liked it because I think adding in those rules, as you say, makes for like a more interesting exercise because you're probably not going to get that much variation if we're looking at all of the bigger movies that there are now. And I think it makes you be a bit more creative and actually reminds you of some of those things that you love that might have even been pushed to the side a little bit because of all of the monsters of movies that have come out in let's say, the last sort of 15, 20 years.
Yeah. So the rules were nothing from the modern Marvel Cinematic Universe. So Iron Man onwards. Nothing from the modern DCs. So no Nolan Batmans through to Shitless League. No Burton Batmans or Returns or Forever. What was the other one? Batman and Robin.
Batman and Robin, yeah.
No Donner Supermans. No Fox / Sony Spider-Mans or X-Men. And no Deadpool. Because Deadpool's a cheat.
Yeah, and as we said, we felt like, yes, you're carving out a load there, aren't you? But I think we're carving out the ones that are more likely to have been casually watched. And I think that brings us down to ones that probably are less likely to have been casually watched, that might be quite interesting for people to pick up and have a watch because it's been lost in the, as we say, lost in the shuffle of so many massive blockbuster movies in that run.
And there's a couple of mine that, when I watched them, didn't know they were comic book films. That's the other thing as well that is in a couple of the lists of stuff that I've been given from my end. There's stuff in there that I was like, oh shit, I didn't know that was a comic book film.
And that's like, again, a very interesting part of the exercise. I mean, partly my fault, but partly because of the way that we released the first episode and when we're recording this, we did put sort of something up on the Facebook group, and we had some responses, and we will get to them. But I think that was, again, very interesting, wasn't it? Of people picking out movies that aren't obvious comic book adaptations, and I think that was something that I think we wanted from this. I guess when we talk about these sort of things, and that's not saying anything about my top 5, because actually mine still ended up skewing quite mainstream, I would say. But how much stuff there is out there that people will probably go, really? That was based off of a comic book, and I guess opening people's eyes to it. So you said the rules, and they are the rules. And I mentioned this before we started recording, but I added a couple of extra rules in for myself. Because I think there were some things that I wanted to kind of limit my view to having a look at it. And one of the things that I did to stop, and because I thought it's something we might pick up on later, is I didn't do anything that was an adaptation of a manga. So if it had been a Japanese comic book, then no, because I think there's a good chance this top 5 might have been just manga adaptations, and that might be one for another day. And the only other thing I did is that regardless of whether it had been adapted from a comic book, I tried to skew more superhero-esque. So I tried to avoid some stuff that I really love but maybe is more sort of genre specific to crime or something like that, like are more kind of traditional flavors of superhero stuff. But yeah, as I say, that was just ones I put on for myself to. When I started writing a list, the list got very long very quickly, and then all of a sudden, like, lots of my favorite children were on the list, and I went, how am I going to pick between my kids? So I had to carve myself back a little bit.
So seeing the fact that when I set this thing, we did this last week, you went, I don't know how I'm going to do it. I can't think of anything.
Yeah.
You got to a point where you've had too many.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's that again, one of the good exercises about this is your mind turns immediately to the ones that have either been thrust down our throat in the last few years or you can't avoid. And I think, yes, once you actually stop and go, okay, what have I watched over the years? Yes, the list got long and long and long. And it reminded me how many movies I really love that are based off of comic books or certainly have the comic book flavor to them.
Yeah. So I will start with my number 5, which anyone that knows me will not be surprised. Spawn. Edgy, metal, nasty, horrible, and evil.
Do you know what? I forgot about it. You know, like when we say about I made a long list, didn't make my list,
Yep.
but not because I don't like it. I just totally forgot about it.
It is that period of sort of late 90s New Line cinema, where anything that came out on New Line, either one of us stuck from school would automatically buy it, or get one of the parents to buy it and always be borrowing it and sharing it around school. It suffers a little bit of 90s CGI. Not gonna lie, some of the CGI doesn't hold up, but it is still fucking awesome. Amazing soundtrack full of brutal heavy metal. Yeah, it's one of those. It's everything that I like, and it's just like evil.
Well, you say about the CGI, and I think when going through this and looking at those movies, again, in that comparative point to what we now know of as superhero or comic book adaptions, budgets weren't there for it, was it? This was a lot of the time, this was companies really taking a punt at a story that they liked or that the creators really liked. But you'd have a limited budget, so yeah, not always do these age well. But again, I think it's that like any movie that is got probably anything longer than 15 years older, you kind of have to look at it with the effects goggles on, don't you?
Yeah.
To kind of go like they were doing the best, or if you feel like they're doing the best they could with the tech they had or the budget they had, then almost you can go, yeah, fine, we'll take that. Yeah, I liked the adaptation from the comic book, and again, talking about like these as adaptions. I collected Spawn at first. I collected most of the Image stuff when it first came out because that was prime time of collecting. And I think part for me is the creators clearly liking the source material that they're working from, and I did get that from Spawn, but yeah, just totally forgot about it. See, bloody, my list is ruined.
And the issue is with this, it wasn't until much later that I realised it was a comic book character. I just thought it was some really cool creative film. And for my sins, I've never actually read any Spawn, which needs to change.
There's a lot of it, and maybe that's a future episode for us. Maybe we can pick some random smatterings of Spawn, because one of the things that I think Spawn's for monthly publication, it's gone over 300 now. I can't remember what number it's got to, but Todd McFarlane, the original creator, has tended to oversee most of it, if not all of it. But there have been times where other writers, other artists, etc., have come on, and there's been lots of spin-offs in the Spawn universe. So yeah, it might be quite an interesting one to go, well, let's dip in, like maybe if we can get our hands on the first couple and see what it's like at issue 100 and kind of see how it goes on. But the animated series come after the movie, I seem to remember, didn't it? Yeah,
that
we
was
got
the
movie
thing
first, didn't we?
Yeah, because that was the thing. Obviously, I then saw the cartoon and loved that, and I just thought literally it was these guys had come up with this character for a film and then made it into a cartoon, and that went on from there. I genuinely, it wasn't until I was probably about 18, 19 that I saw, because obviously you'd see Spawn figures in like in comic shops or in the sort of toy shops and stuff, because it's a really cool visual.
Yeah.
And then behind one of them was an issue of Spawn, and I was just like, and then the guy, one of my mates went, "Yeah, that was a comic first." And I was like, "No."
Well, you say about the toys. I guess two things on the toys is, as you say, what a great visual. It is a very iconic character design at a time where, as we said in the Nightfall one with Armor Batman is that maybe creatively designing characters wasn't such a big thing. And okay, like cloak chains, things like that. But I think he did have a really distinct look that made you want to know more. And of course, when you say the toys, I mean, Todd McFarlane, who created him, started his own toy line. And I think that's why, like, there are a lot of Spawn toys out there, and of course, it's been very successful. Does figures of everything these days. So
yeah, there's a Metallica set that I want that he's done, but I'm not paying the 300 quid for him.
Well, the thing is the nice thing about dropping hints like that on the podcast is if like a mysterious rich benefactor takes to you very kindly, you never know that someone might send you it. But yeah, a great shout, and one that I feel somewhat ashamed that I forgot it even existed to make the long list, let alone make the top 5. But yeah, I as you say, like I think it is of its era, that New Line kind of esque, the movies that they wanted to make, and I think it does what it should do. And as I say, I think a good adaptation of the source material.
So, what is your number 5?
So I confessed to you before this that I found ranking them really hard, and I'm a self-confessed lover of top 5s, and more often than not, I find what the hardest thing with top 5 is you get 4 really quickly, and then like kind of the making that cut of number 5 is really difficult. But yeah, so I wavered a lot on top 5. So bear with us on really where these rank, because they could go up and down. But for me, number 5 was Watchmen, which is Zack Snyder. For anyone who's listening to me on the podcast, they will know my extreme distaste for most things that Zack Snyder has made, or certainly made post Watchmen, should I say. This one, like I said to you about Spawn, I think, although I might contradict this later, I think most of mine have, or something that become apparent to me when I was looking at it is being very close to representing what I read on a page. Now, there's a big caveat to that with Watchmen, because the ending is different. And probably the reason why it's 5, so why it's lower down this list, is because of what they do with the end of the story. But I think this is just very, very, very affectionately made. Like, he wanted to make that comic book in a movie, and I don't know how many of the changes were limited by the movie company, the length of the movie, but I think for the most part, the bulk of the story of our characters is presented, and it looks like how I feel that comic book would look if it had originally been made as a movie. Like if you'd have put that straight onto film rather than on the written page. Yeah, and of course there are some bits from the story that are missed out. Again, it is a movie, and it's a movie adapting what is widely considered one of the best comic book stories of all time. It had to have some bits cut out because it just couldn't do it. But I love it. I love the aesthetic of it, and it's for me. It's when Snyder is good, is when he's presenting an art style that is interesting, but probably has either a good person behind him saying "Don't get fucking carried away," or he's using a source material like this, so actually it's in the vibe of the story that he's made it from, not those Superman movies and Justice League movies we don't talk about.
Yeah. Have you watched the TV series?
So I have seen half of season 1, and I loved the half of season 1 that I watched. Unfortunately, it was at a time when I let my subscription go for my Now TV while I was halfway through it, and I haven't got back to it since, because it was Sky Atlantic. But yeah, I absolutely loved the half of the TV series that I watched.
Because I've not watched the TV show. I like the film. I'm not, a heathen and thing, but I don't hold it in the same sort of reverence that a lot of people do. And I was just thinking, is the TV show is that what a retelling of everything, or does it go into the further books?
So, and again, bearing in mind, only seen like part of it, but what I got from it is it's what happens in a world after Watchmen could be the movie, could be the comic, could be an amalgamation of the two, and you pick up kind of years later. And I think the real selling point for it as a TV show for me is you've got some familiarity there, but it feels like a story in its own, and it's got a voice of its own.
So
I mean,
I wasn't sure if it was a retelling of
no,
the main story, but just expanded because I've got more time to do it.
I mean, again, maybe something that if we get our hands on later, maybe we can do that as an episode. Okay, always talking about what we can do as an episode, but potentially have a look at the TV show and kind of review that. But yeah, no, it's not doing the Watchmen story. It is doing what came after through someone's lens. It's not none of the original creators were involved in it, and it's not based off of the DC. I'm trying to think what the DC ones were called, like the later Watchmen one they did, but I know they put it under kind of branding. It's not based off of anything of that. As I say, I think the one of the hard things about the movie, even though it is my number 5, is if I had a choice, I would tell people to go nowhere near the movie until they've read the comic. Because I do think that if you don't vibe with the movie, you'd never try the comic. And I think people should try the comic because I think it's a masterpiece. However, looking at it from the flip side, because I'd read the comic, loved the comic, I think it's about I was going to say the best telling of it you could do. That's a lie because I think you could go absolutely faithful. But I think he really tried his best. And I think for the most part succeeded until the end.
Yeah.
So, numero 4. And I may cut in some number jiggery pokery and put in some sound effects. Who knows by the time I edit this? But yeah, number 4 for you, mate.
So, mentioned in our top 5 of books that I saw the film first, then went to the book. My number 4 is V for Vendetta. I just fucking love this film. It is dark. It's dystopian. It makes the characters from the book more alive. They are all done so well. Like Stephen Fry's character is done so well in it. Hugo Weaver as V is great. For someone that you don't see their face at all, because it's behind a mask, but there's emotion in an emotionless face. It's just one of those films. As I said, I knew that there was a comic because I'd seen, like, when they were selling the DVDs, they were selling it with the comics and stuff. So I knew that it was from that. But as I said, I went film first and then into the book, and put it this way, it made me first, after watching it, the next day I went to HMV and bought V for Vendetta, the book.
And that is nice to hear, isn't it? I mean, we'll touch on this as we go forward because I think there's no way to escape this when you're doing a comic book related podcast, and when you're going to touch on things like movies, is the difference between the amount of people you can get to watch a movie and the amount of people you can get to read the comic book version of it. But I think you've got to say the movie's been a success when it gets someone to go and read the source material afterwards, because I think that is tougher than people even realize it is. And as you say, what an iconic story. But when I say iconic story, I mean, like, some Took can be iconic as well. I think brilliantly written, and who doesn't want their movies to be taken from? I mean, if you're going to go and get a source material, go and get something that's already brilliant and do a really good job of it. I think that's what we're praying for with this stuff, isn't it?
And it's me, the cast are just great in this. And it's just like, it's 10 years after, or probably about 15 years after the source material. But it's like they've literally found the perfect people for each role. Like John Hurt being the Prime Minister. It's exactly the same type of person that he is depicted in the book. And it's like, was this written for him?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Like, you almost kind of go, like, when they were writing the comic book, if they ever crossed their mind of if we made a film out of this, you can imagine they envisaged John Hurt doing that. I mean, this one for me, and like we said pre-starting that for any that were kind of close to our list, if it comes up on anyone else's or when we review your guys later, we'll talk about honorable mentions. But this one had a barnstorming tussle in my mind for number 5 against Watchmen. They were very, very close, and a few times they kind of pushed each other out. And I think the only thing that made me lean into Watchmen more was, I guess, the more superhero-esque element that comes with Watchmen, and that what happens when the superhero story goes bad. And I think that's the only thing that carved V for Vendetta off the list for me. But yeah, I'm 100% with you on what a great movie and what great material that it was actually taken from.
So what is your number 4?
So number 4 was one of the ones. This was I say about a tussle. This is the one where I went backwards and forwards lots because it is Hellboy 2, and it went backwards and forwards multiple times against Hellboy 1, and I couldn't decide which one of the two I was going to put on here. I love the Hellboy movies. I don't actually really have a good gauge. Like when I'm saying this is my number 4, there could be lots of boo and hisses out there because I don't have that gauge of how it's generally felt with by comic book fans of Hellboy or even the sort of general public of it. But I loved both of these movies. Guillermo del Toro is a director I like, and you're saying about that kind of New Line vibe. I felt like the Hellboy universe, as fantastic as it is in comic books, and as fantastic as it's drawn by Mike Mignola in the comic books, it felt very much like this is a playground Del Toro. I can see why he went into it. I can see why he plays in it. Is it perfect? No, the comic books are tons better. I want that out there on record, that the comic books way outshine the movies. But I think a lot of my love for this is how much they tried to do it. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm sure there are elements in there, certainly. And one of the big things that made Hellboy 2 make the list over Hellboy 1 is in Hellboy 1, I felt there was a few more bits added in because the studio wanted it, like having the kind of human being sidekick kind of follow along the view of that person. I felt that's kind of a studio decision. Whereas I feel like when you get into Hellboy 2, Del Toro really goes into that world of monsters that they are. And you no longer rely on the human beings. You let the creature feature elements of it, but they are us. They're sitting there, like him and Abe Sapien are sitting there getting pissed together, because that's what anyone does when they're stuck in a room with someone and there's booze in front of them. And they didn't rely on having to kind of have that human in there. And I think they look great. I think so much effort's put into, within the limitations of the budget they had, making them look fantastic. And the opening sequence for Hellboy 2 is just every time. It's one of those, when I flick through the channels, if that opening sequence is on, I'm watching that movie. I don't care what time of day it is, what else I'm going to do. I'm going to watch that movie. And I can't talk about Hellboy without not kind of mentioning Ron Perlman, who, you said about John Hurt as a Prime Minister in V for Vendetta. And I like Perlman in a lot of stuff, but he's Hellboy. It's a shame for me that the franchise didn't do well enough to get a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth. I would have loved for Del Toro to have been successful enough in this to spend the rest of his life just making Hellboy movies.
Yes. See, it's one of those. It's because I haven't seen it in a while. It didn't sort of come into my thought process when doing my top 5 for either of the two Hellboys, but it does now make me want to watch them again.
And
it's been a few years since I last watched them.
They are very rewatchable. There is something in that. Like I'll step back to my number 5, Watchmen. I probably won't watch Watchmen. That's not a grand way to. I probably watch that once a year, maybe. in that kind of it. Whereas Hellboy, I think like if it was on, I'd watch it. That's the truth of it, because I think it has the more I don't know, Saturday afternoon popcorn vibe to it as well.
Yeah.
But it's a really clever version of that, because, as I say, there's stuff in there to subvert you where you start to really feel affection for these people that in other movies would be the bad guys, because they look weird, they look different, etc., etc. And I love what he tried to do there. And as I say, a little bit of a cheaty, because I love Guillermo del Toro. So, you know, like, perfect. Love comic books, love him. Worked very well for me.
Yeah.
Number 3?
So my number 3 is the one film that when I was 14, I sneaked into in the Odeon in Norwich, because back in those days it had 3 screens. You bought your ticket at the front, and they didn't tell you which screen, or have people check tickets on screens.
Right.
I sneaked in to see Blade. And everything about this film holds up today. I watched this past weekend. Soundtrack is still banging.
Oh, it is, isn't it? I'm glad you mentioned soundtrack, because it is banging.
Is still as violent, and it is so of its time, but it's still so timeless as well. Because obviously this is around the time when the first Matrix came out, and you had that sort of American kung fu films. So you had like Rush Hour and stuff like that all coming out. But this is, again, another one that I've never actually read the source material, so I can't say how truthful it is to its source material, but just badass, kicking ass vampire film, and it's the sort of thing that you can chuck on all the time.
Yeah,
and just turn your brain off and enjoy it.
You often hear that term, don't you? That kind of mindless fun popcorn flick. And this is one of those ones where, and it does frustrate me a lot of time when I hear that, because I go, I don't want to switch my brain off entirely. I still want it to be good. And I think this is my version of mindless fun popcorn flick, because I think it is good. You know, it's not that there's no substance to it or anything like that. But yeah, like the soundtrack and the action will carry you all the way to the end without any of the stuff they do with the acting. And, you know, like, Wesley Snipes is Wesley Snipes. You know, he's probably never going to win an Oscar, but the right casting for this role, isn't it? Because you know, he does what you need that character to do. Like when you said about Source,
is the right level of arsehole.
Yeah,
and obviously Chris Christopherson as the grizzled old vet. You know, they all work just so well.
Well, when you say source material on this, I mean, like, he's like a character that's got a ton. And I think it's one of the interesting things about the Marvel style of making movies. And I know this is pre kind of Marvel Cinematic Universe and things like that.
Yeah.
But when you've got a character with that much history, you can kind of pick and choose bits. And that's what they did. And also put stuff in your own flavor. But like, this isn't like a story. So when we talk about V for Vendetta and Watchmen, you go, this was a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they tell a story with a beginning, middle, and an end. This is where they kind of went, oh, do you know what? Like, I kind of like that character. I like that bit of story. I'll start to mold that together. And one of the things that I think is a standout for Blade, which I think often it isn't given its credit for, is I think it is the mold that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has built on. So without X-Men kind of doing well, do I think we'd have got to the Caps and the Avengers? No. But I think without Blade kind of, as I say, doing that blueprint of going, do you know what? There's a lot of stories here. We can build an even better story by borrowing from different bits of the lore. I think it's the blueprint, I think, that Marvel then went on to make such successes out of. So yeah, I'm with you all the way on that. Brilliant. It was an honourable mention for me. It nearly made the 5. It was very, very close.
And again, it's another one of those of, unless you know that it's a Marvel character, you just take this as a vampire film from the 90s. Yeah, it's another one of those of, it didn't push the fact that it was a comic book film. It pushed the fact that it was an action film.
Yeah. It kind of got people into the cinema who might have gone, comic book, because
Yeah.
as you say, it doesn't present itself necessarily as that. I've got a question about this, but feel free to tell me you're not going to answer it if your number 2 and number 1 are Blade 2 and then Blade Trinity. But how did you feel about Blade 2 and Blade Trinity?
I can't remember 2, which take that for what it is. 3, the only thing I remember is Cock Guggling Thundercunt and Triple H having the tiniest little vampire dog.
Yes, yeah.
I'm not holding out that they had the same effect that the original did, but there's bits of Trinity that I remember, but it's more Ryan Reynolds and Triple H being parts of it, not the rest of it.
Well,
they are on now, so I have, and I said I haven't watched either of the other 2 in years.
I like 2 a lot, and again, you said about soundtrack. Something that's really important to me in movies. Over the years, I do notice that I really get drawn in by a soundtrack, and I do know that some of the stuff that I really love that will go to the top of any lists. Quite often I'll end up talking about the music that's going on because I think it really pulls me and draws me in. Blade 2's got a cracking soundtrack as well, and I'm with you on Trinity. Trinity I remember for Ryan Reynolds and Triple H, which I don't know. I think it's the much maligned one, and I don't think it's brilliant, but I think they were going through a very tricky phase because I think Wesley Snipes had gone off the edge of a cliff a little bit there, and I think they were having a real hard time getting into kind of come on board. And if kind of movie rumors are to be believed, they were really keen on the Ryan Reynolds character and the Jessica Biel one. And the idea is, we could use this as a platform to spin them off. And, you look at sort of Deadpool now and you look at what happened to Ryan Reynolds in his career. Like it's almost a bit of a, if only, because that would have been quite interesting to see, what would have happened if they did that. But yeah, certainly the first, more often than not in a lot of these movies, the first stands out, doesn't it? But certainly I think 2, I could see it like someone much maybe I said about Hellboy 1 and Hellboy 2. I could see but easily people going, number 2's my favourite for whatever, they just vibe with it a little bit more. But very, very good. Big fan, and I did want to put it on the list, but I just couldn't put it on the list in the end.
So what is your number 3?
And so I had to check this one on the rules. I checked with you the rules. God, my number 3 is Spider-Man, and I know we said no Spider-Man, but Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. This is visually stunning as the starting point for me. I think the art design and the concept behind this is beautiful. I was a little bit kind of iffy of putting it in because we said to generally avoid Spider-Man, and of course it has a lot of Spider-Man in it. That's one of the points of it. But I thought having the bird's eye view from Miles Morales rather than Peter Parker that we've been used to kind of allowed me to score around the side. So yeah, I go into it and I'm watching, let's say, the first couple of minutes when I think I watched it on Sky rather than the cinema. And I was drawn in. I was drawn in by the look. And I think the amazing thing about being drawn in by the look is that it allowed the characters in it and the story to sneak up on me and sneakily make me love that as well. I think the way they wrote it, and again, maybe that's part of when we talk about comic book adaptions. So there are Spider-Verse stories in the Spider-Man run. Miles Morales does exist, but this picks bits from lots of different stories. And again, I think they picked the best bits. And I like the whole cast. I want to see more afterwards. And I think that's a real... we go back to the origins of comic books. Comic books were to get you to buy the next comic book, to get you to buy the next comic book, to get you to buy the next comic book. And this movie has that in droves. So it upsets me a little bit that I don't get more Spider-Verse each month, let alone each year. I don't know. Is it a movie you've watched?
Yeah, I took Will to see it, thinking it's just going to be a cartoon.
Yeah,
and I was like, I I didn't have high expectations. Spider-Man cartoon, it's probably going to be one way or other. And I liked it more than he did.
Yeah.
He popped as it was about 3-4 years ago now.
Yep.
So it'd have been about 6 or 7 at the time. He popped for Spider-Ham.
Yeah.
Because of course, and he had obviously had to explain to him why Spider-Man was Miles and not Peter Parker.
Yeah.
Because he didn't know why this other guy was being Spider-Man. But for me, it was all about Spider-Man Noir.
Yeah.
I want a Dick Tracy style Spider-Man Noir film where he's,
Well, again, we talk about like this of primarily they're making a movie because they want to make millions and millions of dollars, and they know they'll do the movie. But I've always kind of got my eye on what will draw people into the comic books, and there's a lot less Spider-Man Noir out there than there is Peter Parker. But again, having things like this sort of predicated them to actually release sort of Spider-Man Noir stories, and often when there's a crossover now, you'll have like Spider-Man Noir, and you said Spider-Ham, something that I loved from the comic books. And did I ever think I'd see Spider-Ham on the big screen? Fuck no. I felt even if I was ever rich enough to make a movie myself, still no one would ever let me put Spider-Ham on there.
Yeah.
But yeah, as I say, I think you've got your main character. Interesting you say that you had to kind of explain why Miles, why not Peter, because I think that's one of the other things that really got a lot of love for me, and why I put it so high is introducing the world to Miles Spider-Man in a world where Jesus Christ, no one knew anything but Peter Parker Spider-Man. Doing a movie where you're going, no, that guy everyone knows exists. Here's someone else. But yeah, that cast of characters, and these things aren't cheap to make. They take a long time to make. But yeah, but as I say, pump it into my veins. I could take a yearly release in this universe because they can do so much. We've talked on the Renaissance Men podcast, and obviously you've recently appeared on it, where we've talked about things like what if, and I think it always breaks my heart when you get these missed opportunities to go. You were given the keys to the toy chest here. You could play with anything, and you did something bland. Whereas, again, based off of the source material, but you got that, and you picked the most fun characters, and you could tell that they really enjoyed writing them and putting them into the story. So yeah, I'm a huge fan. It is. We'll see when we get to 2 and 1, but this was in number 1 a few times for me. And the battles kept happening. That's how much I love it, and how much I'd sort of stand behind it. Is it could easily be my number 1.
So this was the big scrap for my one, of which was 1 and which was 2.
I think before you go ahead, I think I know what one of them's going to be. I don't know which number it's going to be, but I'm really interested to see what scrapped for you against this, because I know of your love for whichever one might be number 1 or number 2.
So it is another one with a fucking banging soundtrack and angsty as fuck and perfect for my angry little goth heart when I was a teenager. The Crow. Because it can't rain all the time. This is, as a miserable little metalhead teenager at the time, this was the perfect film for me. Again, we shouldn't have seen it when we did, because we all sneaked into the cinema and bought tickets.
Is that like one of the criteria? It can only be in the top 5 if you didn't pay to see it.
Oh no, I paid to go in to the cinema
to see that one though. Yeah,
but I didn't. I think I paid to go in and see some Disney film. It was they were a bit weirded out why a load of 14-year-olds were paying to go and see a Disney film on a Friday night. But we noticed that was the only thing that started at the same time as Crow. So we knew if we went into one screen, it wasn't going to be that. So we knew which screen to go into.
Yeah.
Eating of the eye and all of the nastiness that makes kids love these sort of films. But it is a film that even now I can chuck on and I know pretty much line for line when stuff's coming out. That's how much of a reverence that I have for this. And, it is one of those of, again, didn't know the source material, didn't know it was a comic to start with. I was just like, it's a goth classic film. And I'm like, yes, I'm, edgy metalhead kid. But it's when you then go back and you read like the source material and stuff, and you're like, it then just elevates it further that they did what was on the page so well.
Funny you say about that, and I know we mentioned it earlier, but for a large part, most of the ones that I considered were. It just turned out that I'd read the source material before I'd seen the movie. I guess that's what read a lot of comics, or like because movies based on comics were so few and far between. As soon as I heard there was one, I kind of gobbled up the comics really quickly. This is the other way around for me. This is I saw the movie first, and it did that beautiful thing where it made me go and read the comic, because I do share your love for the movie. Honorable mention for me. It really was. As you say, the look, the kind of the goth-esque like look to it. But I think even if you sort of take out that will vibe with people, I think it was distinct at the time, wasn't it? It was. Yeah. It drew people who had no desire for kind of that sort of musical nature or anything like that. I think it pulled people into, but beyond the comic, it probably people bought the soundtrack that never would have listened to that music before. And I think it kind of has that iconic stature to it. And of course, it has the terrible story that comes along with it that probably pulled a lot of eyes onto it. But I think adds to the myth and the mythos of it as a movie.
It's I think I know that at the time it got a hell of a lot of publicity because of the whole Brandon Lee's last film and all of that. So was that, I think that helps with the goth vibe to it, because can't get more morbid than death, and the fact that the character is has come back from the dead. Just sort of living the gimmick sort of way of the film. Obviously, again, we knew it wasn't going to take long for a wrestling callback, but then seeing Sting using the look for those many years as well.
Well, let's be honest, pretty much still to now, he's not ever really moved away from that as a theory, has he?
No, but it's one of those of it's always been there in my zeitgeist. So always a favorite of mine.
Well, and comic books are a visual medium, and you're going to get a lot of people by the front cover. It's a comic book sort of thing, or you're going to get them to stay because of the visuals, and you want a good story as well. And I know we said it previously, but about Spawn, but yes, it is a great visual, and it's something where you just go, this is fucking cool, regardless of anything else, whatever your walk of life is. I think you see that and you go, this is cool. What is this about? And works great as a movie. And as I say, from the source material, a fantastic comic book. And I think probably, it's about V and Watchmen and things like that. I think it probably still is one where there's a lot of people who probably still don't know it's a comic book.
Yeah.
Because I think it fits so well as a movie that I think there's probably still a lot of people who just go, oh yeah, that's a cool movie. I don't know, I don't know where that comes from. So highlighting it here this many years later, I think for anyone who doesn't know that it's a comic book, try and hunt it down. I mean, I imagine
they're ridiculously expensive these days, because I was going to try and get a copy of it, but
do you know what though? And I'd have to have a look. I don't know if it's on there, but I think that's where for people who are in this for the reading rather than the collecting nature of it, I wonder whether there's sort of digital versions, like Comixology and things like that, because it does make it an affordable way to get into that. Because as you say, it was an indie comic. It was a not the world's biggest print run, and of course, because of popular movies made on the back of it, the price rises. So yeah, trying to get them as single issues or even some of the collected editions from back then, you are looking at a massive barrier to entry at this point.
And also you've got everything else on top of that, of the Crow phenomenon that obviously followed Brandon and the film and all of that, where anything from that world except the sequels is can make gold.
And it is a shame, isn't it, because the sequels are garbage, and there's a part of you that says, like, because of the tragedy that happened, maybe it's something you leave alone, or you go, we'll never touch it again for 25 years because there's a tragic part of the story, but they just don't pass muster, do they? And I think the thing that is a shame for me is normally when a film does well, and I'm sure that did better than they thought it was going to do box office wise. Normally, if they greenlight sequels, they'll give them a bit more budget, and budget isn't everything, but you would hope that would carry it to a degree. But no, avoid all sequels. Singular Crow only.
Though, if you've noticed, all four of my my four so far all been New Line Cinema films.
Yes, and now I'm starting to wonder whether I am right on what your number one will be. And I'm not really sure how to do the next bit, because we said we were going to kind of go down to two and then talk about some of the ones that people had submitted. But I've got a horrible feeling that my number two is your number one. And I don't want to pile into my number two if you're going to do it as number one. So what I thought we could do is maybe if we do some of the honourable mentions now, and we'll do your number one, and I will pile in heavily if it is my number two. And if not, we'll do some strange editing thing where I slip it back in, because I don't want to kind of talk about something that's going to be at the top of one of our lists. But I think my number two is going to be your number one.
So, the couple of lists that I have from my good lady Sarah, her number 5 was 30 Days of Night, 4 History of Violence, 3 Creepshow, 2 The Crow, and number 1 for my sins, didn't know it was a comic book. I thought it was a video game originally. Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Oh yeah, so I mean, very quickly to pick on some of them. The one that I know you're saying you didn't know that was a comic book, you thought it was a video game. The one that I think will be the most surprising for people who don't realise it is a history of violence. Because I think that is the kind of style of movie that it is. It feels like a movie, doesn't it? Like you wouldn't kind of try and track that back as a comic book source material. And as much as I said I wanted to swing more superhero-y on these lists, I think that's, again, the beauty of comic book adaptations to cinema, because I think it opens people's eyes to going, this isn't just a superhero medium, horror, crime, violence, all this stuff's there. And I think an absolute fantastic one. Did you put Her Arm Up the Back to put the same number 2 as you, though? Was that no? Come on, back me up.
No, that was her sort of fighting between herself on whether she put it as number 1 or number 2. Between that and Pilgrim. My best mate Yali has gone with The Rocketeer at 5, Kick-Ass at 4, Hellboy 1 at 3, Sin City, which was in my nearly list, at 2, and The Crow as number 1.
I was going to say quickly on that. I mean, Kick-Ass was in my nearly list. It was of 3 films by the same comic book creator that was in my nearly list, and it would have been my number 2 of those 3. Sin City again was really, really near for me. We said when we were talking about Watchmen and V for Vendetta, like how visually they are such a representation of the source material, and same with The Crow. Sin City, amazing for that. To turn what is the comic, the Frank Miller comic book page into a movie. I don't think that could be done better, and I think it really, really, really stands out. The only thing that pushed it a little bit off of my list is, as the years go by, also terrible sequel, by the way. As the years go by, I think I love Sin City less. the actual story. I think the more I move away from it, the more problematic. And I know it's set in a style, but the more problematic I find some of the Sin City material to be, and some of the later releases in the comic book world of the Sin City stuff. Frank Miller is a great comic book creator. As the years go by, though, I think he got more out of touch with the world, and his stuff was more difficult to read. And I think it's left a little bit of a smudge on it. So that's probably why it didn't make it into my top 5.
Yeah. And then we have Taylor from the Game Burst crew. I don't know if this in which order these are, because he's just put them on Twitter. But we've got Dread, which I'm going to imagine is the newer one than the Stallone version.
I would like to think so. And if it is the newer one, honourable mention for me.
The 1990 version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah.
He has got Blade 2, Hellboy 04, which I'm going to imagine is the original Hellboy, and 30 Days of Night.
Someone was it your missus that had 30 Days of Night as well?
Yeah.
Strangely enough, one of not for this, but one of my friends who's a comic book fan as well, loves 30 Days of Night. I really didn't vibe with the movie. I quite like the comic book, and I don't know why I didn't vibe with the movie, because I'm sure it's good. Like when you talk about visual styles, it looks lovely.
Yeah.
It tells the story. I don't know why, but it just leaves me a bit cold. But certainly, I hear enough that of people loving it that I think it didn't click with me. Not because it's not good or not worthy or anything like that. But
yes.
And so like going through the feedback in the Facebook group. So some of these are numbered, some of them aren't. So the ones that aren't numbered, but we've got Nick Wahlberg who has Hellboy 2, Golden Army, agrees with me. V for Vendetta, so also vibes with you. I've got another mention of Dread again. Scott Pilgrim versus the World mentioned, and Men in Black, which again I think is one that a lot of people would go, "What? That's a comic book?" And yes, it is a comic book.
It's just a film that I don't like. I don't vibe with them.
I mean, it's fine, isn't it? Like, we talked about the popcorn flick earlier. I think I can really see why that's a popcorn flick for a lot of people. But I'm with you. I don't vibe with them. They leave me very cold. From fellow Renaissance man Stuart Garrard, number 5, American Splendor. Again, one that is probably more the look into the comic book world. It is someone's autobiographical account of their life in comic book form. Unbreakable, because I did say like we will have ones that aren't comic books but that are so kind of comic book vibey that we can get in there. Monsters vs Aliens, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 90 again, and Old Boy, which was discounted for my list because of my no manga criteria. But my God, that would have been in my list if I had allowed manga. For Matt Giguere, apologies if I butchered your surname. He's got Persepolis, Batman, Mask of the Phantasm. And I must admit, when I read that, it was quite late on, and I thought, oh yeah, I didn't really think of some of the more animated, maybe for the streaming services or the TV channels.
Well, that was cinema release back at the height of the animated film. Yeah, it was like 93.
I didn't even realise that.
That is arguably one of the best animated Batman films.
Well, and again, we've talked a little bit about Batman animated. I'm sure it will come back, but again, great animation, captures what they were trying to tell in the story, and uses the medium of animation to its utmost. He's also got Road to Perdition. Again, I think one that a lot of people would be surprised. Is a comic book. Dread again, and Fritz the Cat. We have also fellow Renaissance menner, Jimmy the Saint. Sorry to give him his full title. He had Watchmen, Blade 2, Sin City, Addams Family, and my most surprising inclusion in the list, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Surprising because a very and absolutely vilified, isn't it? Now, I have a crafty, and I am coming back to the last list we've got, but I have a crafty love for League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. but I like it for its bad qualities. I love the story behind what a disaster it was to make, what a bastard Connery was, how there were fights, how it overran. And I think the fact that they managed to produce anything is great. However, the shame for me is the source material is amazing. And to get that out of the source material, like if that had just been a rando movie, I think I would have even more love for it from the kind of faux camp, what a mess quality. But yeah, what a shame, because no one will ever touch that again now, because it's cursed, and they'll go, we'll never do this again. And what a shame that such a great story or great source material was sullied by people being wankers, primarily Connery, from what I can tell.
It's there with me. It's there with like Van Helsing, of those films that are always on ITV4 that as soon that just skip because I don't need to see it.
Yeah. And last but by no means least is Richard Cully, who has Watchmen, and he says up until the end. History of Violence again, Akira, Dread, and any of the Lone Wolf and Cub films, which I probably potentially would have lent into that in my top 5 again if it wasn't for my no manga rule, no manga adaptions. But and again, like, I think it shows across that is that once you take a step out of the mainstream, like once you put a rule in, like you said, look at the varied stories you've got there and the varied styles. You know, we've got animated, we've got crime, we've got vampire, we've got horror, we've got personal stories, we've got kind of more the sweeping epics, and you know, I think it does. It's a good advert for the comic book industry, even though it tends to not lead into comic book sales of what people are actually doing. You know, when they're drawing, when they're writing, when they're creating. This isn't just superheroes, kids. You know, there is so much more to this.
Yeah.
There's the boy who said, I made my list to skew towards superheroes.
So, just because as you think that it's going to be your number 2, my number 1, some days you just can't get rid of a bomb. Batman 66.
I'm glad it was, because that's where it is my number 2, fought for number 1, but I thought that may end up being yours, so I thought, come on, let's not piss on the chips of I'll talk about it and it's your number 1. Go for it, mate. Wax lyrical about this absolute gem of a movie.
It is everything that is great about that TV show squished into an hour and a half. It's got all 4 of the best villains in it.
Yep.
You've got Catwoman, you've got Joker, you've got Penguin, you've got Riddler, all working together, throwing in their best bits. You've got moments in this that are memes to this day. You know, Batman running around with the bomb is like a birthday meme that people always throw out. You've got the shark repellents, bat spray. It is
the shark scene is is my picture on a lot of my social medias, because I don't have many photos of myself, but that's something that in my head I go, well, what the fuck do I want to represent me? It's normally either that or from the comic books Batman punching a shark, like so, you know, like it's got kind of that for me of going such vivid memories and such love and such fondness of going, if I want to present myself to the world, I'll let them know that I love when there was a shark and there's Batman.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's all the villains get their moment to shine. Penguin is amazing. I can never remember the guys that played him. It's like Meredith something is Penguin.
And Meredith Brooks, isn't it? Or am I? It's probably a Golden Girl, knowing me. But actually, I'll tell you what. While you're talking, I'll get the cast up so we can give him the credit he deserves.
But he's great. Obviously, Cesar Romero.
Oh, Burgess
I
Meredith
love him.
Penguin.
Burgess
Meredith,
Cesar Romero as Joker is amazing. His portrayal of Joker is the ultimate version of the clown Joker. He's not sinister. He's not a bit deprived, you know, a little bit evil. He is just a clown that's trying to take over things and do shit with jokes, and he does that so well. And I love the fact he refused to shave off his tash, so they have to put the makeup over it.
I think with him as well, considering how iconic a character Joker is, and how iconic some of the latter portrayals of Joker has been, the fact that this portrayal of the Joker is equally up there in my mind when I think of Jokers. Again, I think says it all for me for how he did it, and you know, like as you say, the style, that the fact that he's the clown Joker. I mean, you saying about the villains. I mean, like I remember watching this as a kid, and as we said with the TV show in this, and what an introduction to the characters. And as you say, the four best villains of the TV show, and arguably for me the four best villains in Batman lore. And you just know who they are. They do such a good job of letting you know what these characters are, what they're doing. And then again, I'm not talking about Shakespeare, but in that cartoony fashion, but in live action. And as you say, like all of the meme stuff, I just think it's wonderful. And I wasn't reading Batman of that era. Like when I start to read Batman, we are already in the grittier kind of Dark Knight world. But again, this is Batman. Was this like at periods of time for the writing? This was Batman. You know, like you know, like the kind of the detective, but like the camp detective who relies on random tricks,
and all his utilities, and
his utilities, and you know, his villains have elaborate, ridiculous plans. And it's to thwart it. I mean, like the whole premise of the dust thing, it just stuck with me for so many years afterwards. Even like at the time, I mean, it was something I watched when it was on, because like, you know, it wasn't, you didn't have videos so much at that time, or if you did, you didn't necessarily own everything on video. But you know, maybe there'd be like 4 years gap between I was lucky enough to see it and it be on again. But like that kind of vision of people turning into dust. I mean, to be honest, I was a little bit scared as a kid that there was such a thing and I would be dusted at some point. But yeah, I mean, it's I mean, looking at this in comparison to the rest of your list, as you say, like there's a lot of like a New Line sort of skew to it, and a lot darker and things like that. And I think again, that's the big testament to this of our love for it, of going, this is totally away from maybe the stuff that later on in life we got into, but we still hold it with absolute affection, because it's so great, it's so fun, it's so camp, it's so jolly, it's the actors, again, and the acting is very, very campy, but what an amazing degree of camp, isn't it? You know,
and it's that sort of thing of like it. If you were to sum up for the 4 seasons of the Batman TV show into an hour and a half, this is it. And it's just there's so many little bits, you know, where of course they have to use the bat shop, the bat bike, the bat boat, the Batmobile. It's that sort of get everything in, get all the toys in, all the
when you jump on
gadgets in.
Decades later to like Batman Returns, Batman Forever, Batman and Robin. Now, like I'll give like Batman and Batman Returns a little bit more sort of leeway, but when we get into Forever and Batman and Robin, I think that's why. I mean, the fact that they're crap is a bad start, but I think that's why I took so badly to it, because you know they are these vehicles for cramming everything in to sell the toys and to try and do it very campy. And I go, fuck off. This version exists, where they've done this brilliantly and campy and naturally campy, whereas you're just putting out like toss, trying to sort of try. And again, like when I'm saying all this is my number 2, not my number 1. But stop trying to get on the shoulder of giants. You know, like they've done this, they've made this perfectly, and come into it later and giving them a bat nipple suit. No bollocks. Like Adam West Batman is a special Batman for me, because it's totally different than what people do with it later in the medium. But it's brilliant, and again, it's fun. You know, like
Yeah,
hard
the
to make these
only
days, isn't it?
yeah, this is the thing. The only Batman pop that I have is 66 Batman.
Which
That's
I am very jealous about, and I am for anyone who's listening to our comic book one who hasn't seen my pop videos, obviously to slavishly drive up views, please come and watch them. But most times I open up a pop, you'll hear me say, "Oh yeah, I'll probably collect that line." But my God, I want that line. I want the Batman TV show line, and they're not. It's not that they're kind of ridiculously expensive, but you know, I kind of have to temper myself at some point and baby step as I'm collecting so many things. But you know, like there are you look at things like that, there are hundreds of Batman pops, there are hundreds of Batman statues, you know, there are hundreds of art prints and stuff like that. One of the only Batman visuals I've got in the house is I've got a picture downstairs, black and white, of Adam West Batman, because it is a character I love, but in a portrayal that I really love. And you know, and again, we look at age of it, like this was made in 66, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And you go, okay, is it of its time? Yes. Does it hold up now? Yes. And that's really hard to do. Not much stuff holds up 60 years later, especially stuff that has been redone, reproduced, and many, many stories have been told afterwards.
Yeah.
And if you haven't watched it, anyone, go and bloody watch it. Like,
yeah, as I said, it's one of those of I taped it off telly. Back in the days when people had VHSs, you know those times,
yes,
and
I
wore the tape out because I'd watch it that often. It was on constantly when I was a kid because it is just, as you say, you want a popcorn film. This is the perfect hour and a half. I sat and watched it on Sunday morning. I was eating my breakfast, drinking a cup of tea, had the DVD on. Perfect way to start a Sunday.
When we were doing creating the lists in our heads, one I watched it again very, very recently. I don't think it was Sunday. I think it might have been Saturday, and I watch it sort of semi regular. But because I was doing this list, I did want to watch it again very, very, very recently because I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just nostalgia. You know, that it wasn't just because I watched it as a kid, it had a special place, which, you know, we do. We know that things do that. Was there a lot of nostalgia in it and a lot of memories that kick in? Yeah, of course there was. But this is just bloody brilliant. Like, and again, I think if you've never seen even an episode of the TV show, and shit, if you've only ever seen Nolan's Batman, watch this because you're going to see a whole different world of Batman, but one that I think you'll love, even though it is so different than you've seen before.
And on screen, the greatest portrayal of the Riddler.
Yeah,
because better than what Jim Carrey did.
Yeah,
and if you notice, no one's touched a Riddler since.
Well, and I think when you look at the Carey one, for me, it's him trying to do this, isn't it? Which is, I think, an affectionate attempt at it. But yeah, you know, and when I again read a lot of comics, but when I picture the Riddler, I picture this Riddler. I don't picture the comic book one. And you know, arguably with a lot of the characters, you may well say the same. It might be the same sort of thing. Like as you said, the Clown Joker. You know, there's an argument for that. Catwoman, Penguin as well. This is my Penguin. And no offense to what DeVito does in Batman Returns or all of the great artists that have drawn Penguin, but this is my Penguin. You know, this is going to sound a terrible admission, but I'm hoping I'm the only one who does this. But every now and again, when I'm walking through the house, I pretend I'm this Penguin. And I make the noises that he makes as I'm walking through the hallway, you know, things like that. That's how much it stayed with me. That's how iconic it was for me.
So to sort of put it back to comics when reading, when I read, because I'm a dyslexia and stuff, I will sometimes read out loud when I'm doing it. Whenever there's a Penguin thing, that's the voice I'm doing.
Yeah. That makes me feel a little bit better about me walking down the hallway doing it in my house.
Yeah, when I do Joker, when I'm joking, normally it's Mark Hamill's version of Joker for the boys instead of Caesar, just because a lot of the stuff that I read with Joker in is much more, demented and evil. So animated series Joker is more than Cesar Romero. But when I'm reading the old school stuff, I'm reading it in Caesar's voice.
See, I mean, Joker's a tough one, isn't it? As I say, because there's so many portrayals and so many great portrayals. And but yeah, this would be in my top 4 Jokers, and I think I'd find it really hard to distinguish out of those 4 which one is the one that particularly stands out in my mind. And there's a 5th strong candidate for me as well. But yeah, and like we said about the campiness of it, I think it could easily be dismissed by someone watching it now as going, "Oh, it's fucking rubbish," like the shark bit and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I think it does such a good job of pulling you into that universe. Like a lot of similarities to me to sort of cartoons, where you go into certain cartoon universes and it's more sort of slapsticky and crazy and things like that. It pulls you in straight away, and you forget. I said about that comparison of someone who's watched like Nolan Batman and watching this. I think they would get pulled into this style so quickly that they wouldn't have time to grumble about, well, it's not my Batman, or I expect mine to go, I'm Batman, and things like that. It's just a style of its own, and what a great achievement.
So, what is your
after saying all of that, I think, how did I put something above it? It was really tight for me. As I say, the 3-1 was particularly tight, and I actually had a rewatch of all 3 of them very, very recently to kind of maybe make that final determination for me. And interestingly enough, it's one that has already been mentioned. And not only is it one that has already been mentioned, but it's one that you mentioned as you didn't even know it was a comic book movie. And for me, it is Scott Pilgrim versus the World. I said earlier, I tried to lean into superheroes. Probably the least superhero-y one I have on the list, but certainly has some kind of powers elements and things like that. Again, I tried to go to things where I felt it was a great adaptation of the source material. My number 5, though, I put a big caveat of how it ends. There is a big caveat on Scott Pilgrim versus the World on how it ends in relation to how the comic book ends. And I do prefer the ending in the comic book, and I won't go into that. I don't want to spoil too much. However, despite the fact it changing one of the things I loved about the comic book fundamentally, still brilliant. Still does an absolutely fantastic job with it. I stumbled across Scott Pilgrim, the comic book, before the movie. And I say stumbled across it. It was at a time when I think I'd been out of reading for a little while, and I was looking for something a little bit different. And the art style really jumped out at me. And when I was reading it, I was really going, no one could ever make this into a film. No one could ever kind of transpose this onto the screen. And I mean, it's Edgar Wright, again, a movie maker that I really like. And that was one of the things that really stood out for me of whilst using human beings, because there are human beings who play the actor, they managed to perfectly get that vibe of what the comic book is. And like the kind of the quirkiness, the melting moments from scene to scene, the ultra comic book bits that you have, the kind, the stuff where, I guess, the fantastical side of it that's so much easier to do in a comic book because you're drawing a picture,
and anything can happen.
Yeah, and to transpose that into a movie and not lose audiences, and certainly not lose me. Great soundtrack. Absolutely phenomenal for this movie. Right up, certainly at the time it came out, right up my alley of the stuff I was kind of vibing with, listening to. The cast, my God, that cast has gone on and done some amazing thing. Like, it is full of people now. I mean, shit, most of the Marvel universe was in that movie. At one point you've got like Captain America and Captain Marvel in the same team, and Superman in the same scene of a movie, or what they later become. But yeah, a great cast. Now, one of the things where I think this movie might suffer a little bit for some people is I think it is of a time and it is of a mood. And I think that people can think it's kind of a bit too snarky, a bit too self-referential, a little bit too up its own arse. I don't think it is. I think that's part of the story. Is it actually is pointing, like this story is Scott Pilgrim versus the world. But for me, this isn't about Scott Pilgrim. This is about Scott Pilgrim and the rest. And if anything, for me, it's Knives Chow and Ramona are the stars for me. And I say that Knives Chow is a star for me. That is the character that I love the most in it. And I love the kind of story arc. I love what happens with her. And, the snarkiness of Scott isn't to make Scott great. It's to kind of, when Scott realizes that he is a prick, you go, yeah, you were a prick all the way through this. I'm really glad you've realized that. Now stop being a prick. It's got like the big premise of it is having to fight the evil exes. So you get these great action scenes as well, and very sort of varied levels of it. And it has everything I want in a movie. It's quirky. It's got interesting characters. It's got an interesting story. It's got a great look. It's got a great soundtrack. And it was tough, as I say. The top three for me are very kind of interchangeable. But I love this movie. And again, I said earlier, I think any point of any day, if I flicked over the channel and this was on, I would watch it. Or that's probably a lie, because if I was halfway through it, I would go and get the DVD out and I would watch it, because as soon as I see it, and quite often I find myself. I said earlier about penguining up the hallway. I find myself on walks to work, and I'll find that I'm singing a Sex Bomb song or something from the soundtrack, and it kind of permeates my mind. And I have started. I said about the Batman '66. I have started getting the Scott Pilgrim versus the World pop set. Unfortunately, fucking expensive. Some of them are. One of the Knives Chow ones is going for about £300. So I may never finish this set, but yeah, an amazing way of telling a story that I didn't think could be put onto a movie, because it felt so comic booky.
Yeah, it said it, because I only realised about Scott Pilgrim was when Xbox 360 was a thing and Xbox Arcade was a thing, and all my mates were always playing the Scott Pilgrim game, and I thought, oh, it's a game. And then I saw there was a film, and I was like, so they made this little indie game into a film. Fuck me, they've done good for themselves. Didn't know. So it wasn't until very, very much later that I found out that it was actually a comic set. My better half has the first 3 books, so they've been put in my reading list, in my reading pile.
From a pop culture standpoint, you said that about video games, and it was turned into a video game. But again, I think there's loads of video game references in it. You get like great things like when the fight ends, they turn into coins like a video game, and it was a real like melting pot of pop culture. So it's like we've got the music, we've got the look, we've got like the way that people were dressed at the time. People were in a band, here's some video game stuff. And it threw, I guess where it could have gone really wrong as a comic book and a movie is almost like, let's throw all this shit at the wall and see if it sticks. But I felt like it all stuck. I felt like, because it's I want to say Brian Lee O'Malley, or it might be Brian O'Malley, the guy who is the creator of it. Again, I think his love of the cultural bits shine out to me. I don't think this is someone pretending to like video games. I don't think this is someone pretending to like music. This is someone who loves all that stuff and wanted to get that down on page. And I imagine probably was Scott, and probably at some point was a prick, and somehow come out the other side of it and stop being a prick at some point. But
yes, so they are our top 5s. Surprisingly, only one was in both of our lists.
Nice though that there was like there was none where we kind of went, oh fuck off, that's rubbish. It was kind of good that like that a lot of them kind of sat in that world of honourable mentions or things that we like. But I said earlier, and hopefully this really does come across, is this is our kind of love letter, I guess, to comic books. The fact that we're even doing a podcast of this, and I think, we want to share that love, and we want other people to find that love. And I think this is good for things like that, of going, there might be some stuff out there that you love already you didn't realize had a comic book source material, so kind of jump on board with it.
So next week is the first of our debate sessions. Should we go with that? It is the differences and benefits between digital and physical.
Yeah.
And
that's digital and physical comics for any dirty-minded people out there who think that they're coming along for a bit of a porny discussion with us. That's for way later down the line.
So that will be our next one. Basically, just going over our preferences and
pros and cons
of both of the mediums. But until then, he's been Seddon. I've been Lacey. This is Comic Book Stash. Like, subscribe, hit the bells, do all of that stuff. Coming out every Sunday with this.
Watch Batman 66. Watch Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Watch everything else on our list, but particularly focus on Batman 66 and Scott Pilgrim.
Zed has pop videos out every Monday. Game videos of joining a cult on Wednesdays. The main podcast show on a Friday. Stu has his video game session on Saturdays. So there's shit for you pretty much every day of the week.
We are machines at the moment, aren't we? We're content creating machines.
Get on that. Ring bells. Be known when new stuff comes out. And if you are listening to this in audio form only, start watching the videos. You can see our beautiful faces and our array of pops.
And I know the show's there, and obviously we spoke about like some feedback from people, but on either like a review on whatever podcast service you use, or on the comments on the YouTube, let us know what your top fives are. Let us know what is, and also if you watch any of this stuff and you love it, let us know. If you watch any of this stuff and you don't love it, let us know and let us know why, and then we'll kind of put you to a side list where we want to love you, but we can't because you said that Batman movie wasn't good.
So until next time, goodbye.
Thanks for watching, and just remember, you can join the Cult of Egg by liking and subscribing to this YouTube channel. We release regular content where we talk about all things geek, all things pop culture, and all things that we're interested in. You can also come along and join the discussion on Facebook groups and Renaissance Cast. And you can join us on our Twitch channel where Stu regularly streams games. And if you'd like to support us, then please follow the link for the Patreon. Thanks very much.